Welcome back to the 286th episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, including the RNC has put out their platform for 2024. A interesting story about a U.S. outlet overseas that puts out information that's pro-U.S. having a little bit of a scandal, and then a completely out-of-the-blue article about Athletic, the non-alcoholic beer company, and their rising success, and we'll analyze what that means about American culture. And, of course, we will end today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. But that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump into our daily debate. So, ever since Miss Laura Trump has become co-chair of the RNC, you have seen lots of messages about being very in the pocket for Donald Trump. They're saying, this is our guy, he's our national candidate, and we are going to be behind him no matter what, 100%. So, do you think that Laura Trump and her approach at the RNC is the right way to do it? Building off of Trump alone? Or should they be building for future coalitions? I don't know. It's up to you. Tell me what you think. Throw it down in the comments section. Good move, smart move, not so much. But either way, whether you think it's good, smart, or ugly, there are a whole bunch of consequences because of it. And this specific one, the RNC platform, it's pretty obvious that this is a pro-Trump and in alignment with Trump party right now. And I don't mean that to say, oh, well, they're just out here saying, oh, we're going to support Trump. No, it's literally in the language. So let's get into the article here. It comes from the Daily Signal. Headline reads, Roadmap to Make America Great Again. RNC announces 2024 GOP platform. And when I was going through this, I was saying to myself, oh, okay, I see what they're doing here. And then I got to the 20th one. I was like, oh, okay, we're still doing this. So I'll read you just a few of them from the top line. 1, seal the border and stop the migrant invasion. I mean, the invasion is pretty standard Trump language, but it's become it's gone all across the RNC now. People are worried about this issue, everybody in America, not just Republicans. And it is a good way to frame it if you're trying to evoke a little bit of fear, a little bit of passion in people that you're trying to talk to. So then the next one is carry out the largest deportation operation in American history. Calling it the biggest thing ever, that's not necessarily a Trump thing, but it definitely falls in line with it to some degree. But those are the ones that I think really have the Trump flair to them. The next one is end inflation and make America affordable again. So what is this? The MAF? M-A-A-A? Is that what we're going for? Is that a MAGA? So you can see these sort of tones happen throughout multiple times. I'm not going to read every single one to you again, but they are all I don't want to say a variation because some of them have nothing to do with it, but like number 11, rebuild our cities, including Washington, D.C., making them safe, clean, and beautiful again. So you have a lot of these returning ideas of, again, number 18, deport pro-Hamas radicals and make our college campuses safe and patriotic again. And then there's number 20, unite our country by bringing into new and record levels of success. So while these are all very general, which is I'm going to say that's the idea of politics overall. Okay, they're going to put out general statements that can apply in lots of different ways, that can be read many, many different ways, but a lot of these have the Donald Trump note. It's not, oh, we're going to fight for the everyday middle-class American. So that would be a talking point from, the Romney campaign, the 2012. Versus now, we're going to worry about success. We're going to make this great again, casting it as though that it is not where it needs to be. But hey, we were there once and we can get to that point again. I think that it's very obvious here, especially throughout most of the language. I think this other one is interesting. Number 8, prevent World War III. So I think anybody could agree with that. Hey, let's not actually go to World War III. Quote, restore peace in Europe and in the Middle East and build a great Iron Dome, specifically a great Iron Dome, not an Iron Dome, a great Iron Dome missile defense shield over our entire country, all American made. I think the great part of that is something that is definitely a Trump way of putting it. And I also think having the addendum, the little additive there at the end, the all made in America one, while it is a very important caveat, I don't think politicians in the past would have done it that way. They probably wouldn't have added that little statement. They would have said, oh, yes, we need to make sure that we have an Iron Dome to protect our country and our great citizens. That's how they probably would have framed it. But no, now they put the little addendum, and hey, this isn't just serving one part of our political agenda, is what they're saying. They're saying it also serves another part, which is we want to bring manufacturing back to the United States, which is another point. Stop outsourcing and turn the United States into a manufacturing superpower. So these are all very, very general statements. And when you come down to it, they are general Trump statements. You can see the influence that he is having on the Republican Party. And for those of you who have listened to me before, you'll be like, Alex, yeah, we know. Okay, you talked about the fact that his daughter-in-law is actually running, or at least has her hands deeply in the pie of the RNC. And that's not me trying to be like, overly simplistic. Okay, hey, yeah, we know that Trump's having an influence. These are the reasons why. Oh, we know that Laura's there doing her thing. I think that what I'm trying to actually get at here is it's also a messaging thing. It's no longer just who they're supporting, who the donors are giving their money to, what the network is set up in order to make sure that money goes to his PAC. It's no longer just backing him. They are adopting the Trumpian language. You also see this on policies in some areas like Social Security and Medicare. So I want to go to this point here. Let me make sure that I have it right, so that anybody who can go, you can go read this article. It's in the link in the description. If you want to read what I'm saying here, then you can actually go. So I want to make sure that I get the number correct on this one. So it's actually number 14, and it says, quote, fight for and protect Social Security and Medicare with no cuts, including no changes in the retirement age. That is a crucial, out of everything in here, most of it is very general, or at least they provide some solution, some platform, quote unquote, but it could be interpreted a few different ways, maybe a few different promises. This is one which is an outright, matter-of-fact policy statement, and it is something that the old RNC, the old Republican Party, would not have done. You heard it during the primaries. Nikki Haley is saying that, hey, we need to worry about Social Security and Medicare. We need to make sure that it's around. We may have to up the retirement age. We may have to restructure some things. This is a classic Republican talking point, which is we need to address the failing Social Security system, and also, ever since the Affordable Care Act went through, the Medicare system as well. And we know that Trump for a long time says, hey, I'm not touching it. I don't want to deal with it. That is a political third rail that I'm just not even going to deal with. Republicans didn't want to touch it unless they absolutely had to, unless they were talking to the more hardline conservatives who are definitely at the events, and they're saying, yes, this is something that we really have to do. Otherwise, they didn't, when they were trying to appeal to the broader public, they didn't necessarily mention it as much. And Trump's doing the same thing, but actually, he's actually doing more now. Instead of just staying away from it, he's actually saying, no, it's a guarantee. I'm not going to touch it. So this is a big shift within the RNC. This is what the populist movement will do. As the coalition has brought in more people that are not of solely conservative bend, but rather the people who saw how good Trump's economy was for them. And they saw how Trump, or at least they felt as though Trump was speaking for them against the elites, against the people in Washington. They had a little bit more moderate dispositions in some locations. Or maybe they didn't have the most moderate dispositions, but they were at least friendly to the idea of having these social safety nets in place to help them out when they get a little bit older. Because a lot of people that he would be talking to, rural voters or just hardworking Americans, they've been working their entire lives. Maybe they couldn't afford to actually put away enough for retirement. Or maybe it has nothing to do with actually affording. Maybe they have a great savings account, but they say, no, I want that backup just in case. There are some people who are just fair-minded. They're sitting there saying, the person who is a middle-class woman from Ashburn, Northern Virginia, and she's sitting there like, yeah, no, I've paid into Social Security my entire life. So no, you can't just raise the retirement age arbitrarily. And even if they were to do a phase-in system like Nikki Haley actually suggested, rather than it being immediate, it would be after a certain point. It's still not politically advantageous to go with that sort of message. And Trump recognized that. He said, this is the coalition that I have, and they love this, or at least they don't want to see it go. So sorry, Republicans, you put me me into the party here. You let me come in and take over the apparatus. Now we're going to shift the window. And it feels very similar to how the conservatives in Britain the Labour after the World War II came in, and they were increasing the amount of welfare programs, especially the National Health Service. That was the main one that they got through. And conservatives weren't able to repeal it, and eventually it just became so unpopular because people became used to it that you can't get rid of it. Now, Social Security has been that way for a long time, but what was important was the shift in the British politics where the conservatives no longer even talked about it. They were like, oh no, we're all for it now. This could be a pivotal moment in the Republican Party, especially with the new coalition that people are bringing in, the Trump people, Laura and Donald Trump himself. It could be a pivotal shift in the the RNC going forward. And that's why I thought this platform was very interesting, because there are some things where I'm like, oh yeah, traditional Republicans love this. So some of this is just red meat for the MAGA base. And it is very, very interesting to break these sort of things down, because we were looking at a realignment in live time in 2016, 2017, 2018. Now we're watching the real-time implications of that realignment, and also what happens when no longer is it just a cultural realignment, but actually the institution itself is having a realignment and coming in line with that culture. And it is very, very fascinating to live through a moment like this. We'll see how long it lasts. We'll see if the traditional Republicans come in and say, okay, hey, this new coalition, this is what Donald Trump built. I love Donald Trump. I love what he did, but come on, we need to be realistic, guys. Okay, we are the party of rationality. We are the party of sitting down and saying, pick up your bootstraps. It's going to be rough. I'm not going to give you the good news, but I'm going to give you the honest news. The Social Security, not going to work. We got to adjust it. That's the reputation that the Republicans like to have before. And we'll see if after Trump is gone and the person who succeeds him comes up, if he sticks to the traditional conservative messaging or if they follow this new path. Like I said, this RNC platform says a lot, because also it's the first one that's come out during Laura Trump's tenure as co-chair. So, or at least the first one that I have seen, and this is a lot more publicized than anything else that they have put out there, so that's probably why I've seen it. So, that was just the interesting breakdown I wanted to do on that one. Cool stuff coming out of the RNC. And by cool stuff, I'm not endorsing any of the policy proposals. As you know, if you're a listener here, my job is not necessarily to come out and go all for one policy or another. I'll try to explain the merits of some things. Or if I have a really, really staunch opinion on a particular topic, normally I'll have an article specifically about it, especially like free speech, economic issues. And I take that back. I will, very often, I do actually come out with the really strong policy opinions. But on this one, I thought it was more interesting to analyze what this means for the future of the Republican Party, and also point out, like I said, that this is a pivoting point. This is a shift. And it's always fun. It's always interesting to live through those, in my opinion. And I say that as a person who this is my first one. Maybe we'll have lots of them during my lifetime. Maybe not. We'll see. So our next article comes from the Free Beacon with the headline, "We were all dumbfounded. Staffers speak out against U.S. government news agencies' attempt to discredit whistleblowers." And I will be honest, I had previously learned about and had conversations with people about our news agencies, our outlets that are around the world that really bring an American perspective to other places. And what I found here is I always thought they were really small operations. I thought they were more tiny little funded things where we broadcast in. No, these are built out newsrooms that are basically operating as propaganda tools for the U.S. government. And the one we're talking about specifically here, or at least the overall agency, then we'll talk about the specific station. The overall agency is the U.S. Agency for Global Media. And this sector, the one that's having the issues, is the one that is actually in the Persia region. I want to make sure that I get the official name correct here. So let's give it a second. Here it is. Voice of America's Persian News Network. So is it our job to be propagandizing around the world? I want to ask you, and I say propagandizing, at least even providing an American perspective around the world, are your tax dollars being used justly in doing this? If you agree, great. Put it in the comment section. I'm really interested to actually hear what people think. Because when I first heard this, I said two things to myself. I said, one, Okay, so I didn't realize how big this is, and it seems like we are pushing our message around the world. I don't know how I feel about that. Number two, which is the counter argument that I presented myself, which is, of course, there are plenty of geopolitical reasons and strategic reasons to make sure that information from the United States, or at least an American perspective, gets into some of these countries. For all we know, there could be the next president of Iran listening to Voice of America, and he could become a moderator, or he could be more pro-America because of these sort of things. So I understand all the arguments for it, and there very, very well could be great geopolitical strategic importance to them. I think that you could also make a very important argument, taking both of my points that I had made in my head when I was first reading it into consideration. Why don't we pare it down? Why don't you just have one or two? Maybe instead of you as the government making the content, you promote content from people who talk about these issues, and you just put it out a little bit more broadly. You have a Twitter account, which takes maybe one or two people that go through and look at different stories, look at different content, try to promote these things across the internet, because at the end of the day, that would cut down on a lot of costs. You don't have to have an independent bureau there, and you also don't run into possible issues like this. So while the Free Beacon is taking the point of view that, hey, this is a big scandal, they're not actually analyzing whether or not these sort of these sort of operations, because at the end of the day, it is an operation. I mean, the entire agency is called the U.S. Agency for Global Media. That doesn't sound overarching imperialistic at all. No, definitely not. So the real question, in my opinion, should be whether or not we want to continue funding operations like this. Like I said, there are points that make sense, but when you hear about scandals like this and you understand that, one, people are fallible, but two, any agency that has the purse strings of or is attached to the purse strings of the U.S. government means that your taxpayer dollars are going directly there. What if their budget? Okay, so I don't know their budget off the top of my head, and I want to do a little bit more research on this for sure. But let's say their budget is a small $100,000 to operate, which wouldn't even pay for salaries. But say that they could actually cut that in half. And this is just a hypothetical, I'm not saying it's realistic, to $50,000 a year by retooling things, and instead of having local operations and doing things necessarily on the ground, or even having a broad team that they have currently with producers and executives and everything like that, directors of programs, why not just pare it down? Either have one or two people that just make a whole bunch of content, put them out on all the social media platforms. You could even have it syndicated. I mean, all you would have to do is give somebody a DJI mic and put them down in front of a microphone, or in front of that microphone, and let them rant. Guess what? Podcasts are extremely popular nowadays. You can even run them on FM radio if that's what you're concerned about, because I understand that internet's restricted in some of the places that some of these operations would be very, very important. I'm not naive enough to not understand that. But you don't have to have huge, robust news operations, because at the end of the day, the U.S. government's aim here, and let's be clear, I could be wrong, so if somebody knows better than me, then tell me, but the aim is not to have the most robust, trustworthy news agency in the world. It's to make sure an American perspective gets out there. One or two people can do that, and let them do their own stories. Have them be a self-starter, so to speak. They think that this issue is really important to the Persian area, and that this is the implication for the United States. Let them sit down and talk about it. But no. Of course, it has to be bloated, but also there has to be the goal of ensuring that a pro-America message gets put out there, and that we have a really beautiful team around these people, that it's as robust as possible. No, remember, nowadays we live in the age of quick and dirty information. It doesn't have to be this robust, and maybe we could save some taxpayer dollars if you really still want to die on the sword that we need to have an operation like this going around the world. I also understand that other nations do it as well. I know that Russia and China all have their different outlets that breach into the Western atmosphere, and that we should probably have some that do the same. Well, why can't we do that based off the fair market approach, besides the fact that China blocks some of them? I mean, even Russia blocks some outside outlets, so I understand. But if they're blocking outside outlets in the free market aspect, then why would they let the U.S. government networks in? So if you would try to make an argument that, well, we can't actually penetrate some of these countries, and you made the example, Alex, that, well, they're propagandizing us, so we can try to propagandize them. But if, like I said, if they're not letting in the New York Times, if they're not letting in the Wall Street Journal, if they're not letting web traffic go there in the first place, what would anything change? Why would anything change when it comes to letting U.S. propaganda in? I mean, or U.S.-backed media in, the government-backed media in? No, they wouldn't. Okay, so I think that argument falls a little bit flat there. So my point being, well, just let the free market win out. The Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, whether you like them or not, the New York Post, the Sun, the L.A. Times, the Miami Herald, all of these places, whether you like it or not, they at least show an American perspective of the world. Sometimes they have crazy articles from one side, sometimes they have crazy articles from the other side, but they still show an American perspective. And guess what? If there was a thriving market out there for China correspondence or relaying a certain point of view to a Chinese population, and it was, maybe the LA Times had a specific bureau for it, they hire 2 people, guess what? If there was a market for it and they could make money for it, they would do it. I just don't think there's much of a market for it, and I feel as though we're being a little bit heavy-handed. Then again, I think other people will make an argument that this is better than having to do direct intervention. So, fair enough. All perspectives are allowed here. I just wanted to make sure that I laid out my arguments on that one. While they may not be the strongest in the world, because I don't know exactly what their budget is overall, I think in theory they hold up pretty well. So let's jump into what the actual scandal that's going on here is. And I'll make it brief because I actually wanted to use this article to talk about what I previously talked about. But I also think that it's important to talk about these sort of scandals in these agencies and how they could be, I don't want to say more likely, but they happen. We seem to see them in more government agencies nowadays. So maybe there's something to that. Probably not, because all people are flawed, but it's interesting, and especially when it's our taxpayer dollars, we got to call it out. Quote, "The House Foreign Affairs Committee determined in June that senior GM employees spent years shielding agency executive Cetra, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this last name as well, Sieg, from discipline over allegations she, quote, used taxpayer funds for personal travel, falsified her educational credentials to obtain higher level employment, and engage in a pattern of favoritism that materially benefited some employees at the expense of the public." So one of the things is that she actually let one of her favorite people there, one of her favorite workers, use taxpayer dollars to fly around to different locations that didn't necessarily have the most material benefit. They're not saying that there wasn't any material benefit to what this employee was doing. They're just saying overall the material benefit was not that high for what the employee was doing and using the public funds for. So that's also a very interesting one. What I thought was very funny is, so the article talks about they have three, I don't want to say big, but they have 3 sources who they have said that they're going to keep a little bit anonymous so that they don't have to worry about retaliation or anything like that. But I want to talk about the response that was given to given by the agency, which was, quote, "The committee's early findings resulted in the agency issuing Sieg the most minor of slaps on the wrist in the form of a official letter of reprimand." Oh my gosh. Guys. She got a letter of reprimand. Oh my, no, I bet she went home crying to her family. I bet she was so sad. I bet she called whoever she needs to call and said, "Oh my gosh, they sent me a meanly worded letter." Come on, guys. Come on. When you have incidents like this, when you have people showing favoritism, especially when they're wasting U.S. taxpayer dollars, the whole point of government oversight, the whole point of being able to adjust the purse strings, having the power vested in Congress to review these sort of things, is to keep people liable, to make sure that we have the best operating these government agencies, not people that want to exploit them for their own gain or to gain favoritism with other employees to get higher paying jobs, so on and so forth. So while I was pointing out at the very beginning that this is an issue of whether or not we should have these sort of operations going around the world, I don't think you can make a solid argument when this sort of thing is happening to keep the Voice of America Persia News Network as it is right now, structured how it is with the leadership that it has. So there you go. Laid it out on that one. If you want to do more research, or at least you want to read this article, like I said, just links in the description. And remember, if you're doing more research, it is the U.S. Agency of Global Media, USAGM. So if you want to do any research on their budget and things like that, come back to me with some facts that I was totally wrong. No, they actually don't even spend $100,000 a year. It's actually net positive or whatever because they have advertisers. Fair enough. Point it out. Love to hear it. So our next article comes from the Wall Street Journal. Exclusive. America's biggest non-alcoholic beer brand doubles its valuation. And, for a good chunk of time, I have heard about NA, non-alcoholic beer. NA. So, as you can tell by my mockery, this is something that is relevant in the circles that I run in, or at least the peripheral areas that I operate in. And there is a very particular person who does indeed love their NA that I know, also listens. And if you have made it this far, that person, welcome. I am talking directly to you now. You have inspired me to talk about the NA craze, and also this article from the Wall Street Journal does a good job breaking down what the expansion has been within this market. And the reason I thought it was an interesting thing overall, and why I clicked on the article, because when I look at articles nowadays, I do read articles that I'm just genuinely interested to read about, but very often I'm looking through things and I'm saying, okay, is there something that's a cultural touchstone here? Is there something, a wider point that I think resonates? Is there something I've seen here previously that I've thought about that I can relate to you guys? Because I do, like I said, I read news on my own time for enjoyment, but also I do read news specifically to find things that isn't necessarily getting out there as much. Like there may be one article talking about it, or you may see something on Raw Story, but it's not going to be picked up by MSNBC or something like that. And I don't always agree with everybody that I'm picking up and talking about, but I want to have a point overall that I want to get at, and I want to bring some of the less seen stories out. And it happened previously with the red state inflation story. It was something that got out there a little bit broader, but not everybody on YouTube was talking about it. So I had the opportunity to talk about it a little bit more. And I think this is one that will be talked about a little bit, but it will still fly underneath the radar. But what I think is really important, because they cover the expansion of the company, and that underlies the fact that there is a market for it, underlies something else, that people are focusing, or at least taking a little bit of the market share away from alcoholic beverages. This means that either there's a conscious choice to be healthier as some people are getting older. They also mention here that Gen Z, the youngest generation, is actually not the biggest fan of beer in the first place. That's because we have our own little thing we call marijuana, which we happen to absolutely love, apparently. That is one of the big loves of our generation. I was surprised. I was honestly surprised when I saw that more people were, and I say more people, a larger percentage of people were smoking marijuana, and not just doing that on top of beer consumption, but beer consumption was actually lowering. So we were actually kind of swapping some things there. We were changing a little bit of the demographic makeup, which it makes sense to some degree, because at the end of the day, it's become legalized, and there has been a whole industry that has popped up around it in multiple different states. So I guess that makes sense to some degree, but I was surprised that it was eating into the alcoholic beverage sector, because that is something that, whether we like it or not, we do love. Here in America, we do love our beer, our wine, our spirits, our alcohol in general, but especially our beer. So I want to read one or two little quotes from here, and they'll kind of outline what we're going through. Quote, "It sold more than 258,000 barrels of beer last year, making it a top 20 U.S. brewer," executives told the Wall Street Journal. So, wow, okay, 258,000 barrels of beer. You probably don't have much context for that, neither do I, but let's take a step back. Even if you don't have context for the other one, they did provide a little bit, saying, okay, it's a top 20 U.S. brewer. So you're putting it up there with your Yinglings, you're putting it up there with your Budweisers, or sorry, technically Anheuser-Busch, your Millers, your Coors. You're putting them up there within the top 20. So how long has it been around? Because those companies have been around, at least most of them have been around for 50 years at the least. Maybe in their current forms, they've merged a little bit more recently, but the foundations of the company have been there for at least 50 years. And this brand, Athletic, quote, was founded in 2017 and has quickly ascended to the ranks to become the king of non-alcoholic beers. And yeah, end quote. And all of the traditional ones, they have their own. I have seen the other non-alcoholic brands, and they're doing their thing. They're trying to keep up. Heineken as well. But no, if you're looking for one specific non-alcoholic beer, you're going to get done right, it's Athletic. That's what I've been hearing. And this all speaks to the fact that we are reapproaching the way that we think about using substances like this. I think this is a very important, very, very important shift. Whether it is just a fad, like, the how should I say, hard cider fad or the craft brew fad was a thing, I don't know. I genuinely don't. Maybe people are realizing some of the negative effects of alcohol and they're changing their ways. Maybe it is more about the fact that young people don't want to drink beer. Like they want to go out and have a social experience, so they'll buy a non-alcoholic beer, but they actually don't want to get drunk off of beer. Maybe they have another way that they do it, or maybe they just don't want to do it at all. But it underlies the fact that the market is shifting one way or another, and whether or not that is a fad or is a sustainable long-term change is very, very interesting in my mind. And I think it speaks to maybe a little bit of a sobriety. And when I say that, not like a sobriety from doing substances. What I mean is a certain level of sobriety that, okay, hey, this is a serious time. We need to be serious about certain issues. We need to not be getting messed up. We need to not be lost in different experiences that are brought to us by substances. Maybe people just don't like the fact of losing control. There could be lots of different psychological reasons that people don't drink, but I definitely think that this is a symptom of something. Now we just have to underline what the cause is. And there, of course, it can be multifactorial, but it's just interesting. And that's why I wanted to bring it up. I think I said interesting in that article over the course of the whole thing about 20 times. Probably sound like some random politician who's stuck on the same thing. It's very interesting. This point was interesting. Interesting point. Oh, that was a good question. Very interesting. Yeah, I'm sorry. I did not mean to sound like a broken record there. So let's jump, after all that stuff, let's jump into our daily delight. In this story is a very, very cute one. It comes from USA Today. Headline reads, "Watch aggressive cat transform into gentle guardian after her owner had a baby." And you always love these sort of stories where if the cat gets adopted into the family, there's a huge personality change, but I think I've done one or two recently about this exact same thing, where it's not just spurred on by the fact that it's adopted and has a loving family, but also there's a fundamental change when a baby is born and it feels a protective instinct. Now, not all animals are going to do that. That's fair enough. But these case studies are great. And we love to see new babies coming into the world and coming into America specifically, keep on growing that population. But also we love it when our pet companions, nowadays some people are calling them children too. I do not subscribe to that way of life. But the point being, when those pet companions that we have also accept in the children that we're bringing into the world, and even it allows them to become better. People always talk about how parents get better, or people get better once they have kids, or they have a little bit more seriousness. Not always, but there's always sort of that trope that goes around. Well, no. We need to start focusing on how the babies make our pets better. So if you want to see this cute video, or like I said earlier, if you want to read any of today's articles, they're all in the link in the description below that like and subscribe button. Yes, I didn't mention the like and subscribe button earlier because if you've made it this far, maybe you'll consider it. If you didn't make it all the way there before, then they weren't going to consider it. Not a big deal. With all that said, if you want to check out the podcast, there's the links in the description to it on Spotify, Pocket Casts. I was going to say Google Podcasts. That used to be part of my speech. It does not exist anymore. Podvine. And down there is also the Twitter handle @YourDailyFlip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. They're a little bit shorter. This last one I did was about casting the villain in history. And while they're not structured like this with the article, I always find them interesting, and sometimes I pull in outside information that is always enjoyable to talk about and just kind of go for 10 minutes without really trying to report on all the news and just have some interesting conversations. And sometimes they're completely idiotic and I don't know what I'm talking about. I go back a week later, I'm like, I don't know necessarily what I was thinking at that point, but hey, we got to have these sort of discussions, and sometimes just hearing people rant nonsensically is fun. So if you want to check it out, go over there. With all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.